Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 14 of Seed. My name is Ashley Robinson. I am the editor of the Alberta Seed Guide, and today I'll be acting as your host. Today, we are going to look at so called buzzwords and how they're used in business to drum up interest. This all ties into our season topic of Science Under Fire because these so called buzzwords affect the processes that we can use to develop and grow seeds. So, we're going to look a bit closer at the effect that has today. I have a few guests here from the seed and agricultural world to talk about this issue with me. Thank you to Kent Chesky and Joe Swartz for joining us today. To those watching, please don't hesitate to ask any questions you may have for our guests in the chat box. And let's start with getting to know our panelists. Kent, if you could please tell me a bit about where you work and what your group does.
Thank you, Ashley. I am the Executive Vice President and CEO of an organization called the Council for Agricultural Science and Technology. We were formed about 50 years ago, and our membership is primarily scientific societies, universities, nonprofit organizations, and a number of companies and lots of individuals. We were formed and continue today to help bridge that gap between the public and the agricultural community's understanding of the science, technology, and innovation that's important to food and agriculture. We're probably best known for publications that we put out and things like that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I think you're a great person to have on this chat, of course, which is why I asked you to be on here. And now, Joe, can you tell me a bit more about yourself and where you work at?
Hi, I'm a professor of chemistry at McGill University in Montreal, one of the world's top-ranked universities. And I'm also the director of our Office for Science and Society, which has a mandate to separate sense from nonsense, foster critical thinking, and keep people up to date on what is happening in the world of science. We are totally unbiased. We do not accept any funding from any vested interest. It makes no difference to me whether or not any producer uses preservatives or genetic modified organisms. The only thing that matters is whether or not there's scientific evidence for what is being done. So essentially, to encapsulate it, it is our job to separate sense from nonsense.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Once again, another great person to have on this chat. So first off, my first question is going to be directed at Kent, and then Joe, you can hop in after if you have any comments. So when you hear the phrase buzzword, what do you think of?
To me, when you say that, I think of words that come to mind like organic or cage-free, even sometimes the word sustainability. They're words that are often bannered around that people often do not have maybe a thorough understanding of what they are, what they mean. In our world, we think of those as process labels. They're things that talk about a process by which we produce food or product. They have very little to do actually with the actual quality of the product itself.
Yeah, I would agree. Basically, though, that's what buzzwords mean. Then there are, of course, all the no buzzwords, no cholesterol, no preservatives, no parabens, no artificial colors, no artificial flavors, no GMOs, etc. So all of those are buzzwords. And to me, they generally are designed to capture the public interest, suggesting that products that have those words associated with them are somehow better, either for the health or for the environment. And very often, of course, that is not the case. And there are really bothersome ones like superfoods and the no cholesterol label on oils that never contain cholesterol in the first place. So there's a lot of misleading information with these buzzwords.
And yeah, that's really interesting. You named off so many different words that we see a lot of the times on bottles or boxes when we're walking down the grocery store aisles. And so I notice a lot of these labels myself. So when we're talking about buzzwords in agriculture, do we see a lot of these coming from being kind of consumer driven, or where are these coming from that companies want to use them? Joe, please.
Well, they come from two sources. One, of course, the companies themselves that are trying to promote the sales of some product. And there are also some activist organizations that use these buzzwords, that we should be looking for something that has no preservatives or no artificial colors or does not contain GMOs. So it's interesting that sometimes producers themselves will use those terms. Companies that don't produce any genetic modified, so-called contaminated product will promote that. But also the activists will make hay with those kind of words. So it's a compendium, of companies and individuals, bloggers, and activist organizations that use those buzzwords in different ways.
Interesting. Yeah. Kent, do you have anything to add to this about where you see these buzzwords coming from? Is it consumer driven?
Sometimes some of it is consumer driven, but I think often a lot of it is from often food marketers who are really looking for a way to differentiate their products in the market. But often I think the either intended or unintended consequences is that it really terms to be viewed as product degradation of anything that fits outside of that. And I think that's often where maybe the unintended consequences or the unintended damage comes to it. And I think the concern a lot of times with maybe the misuse of these terms are often what turn into be labels.
To me, the biggest misuse, and one that wants to make me tear my hair out, is chemical free. Yeah. Which of course is a totally absurd term. Everything in the world is made of chemicals. Chemicals are not good or bad. They are just things. They are the building blocks of all matter. And there's no such thing as a good or bad chemical. There are useful and not useful ways to use these substances. But to put the words chemical free on any product is just absolute nonsense. And you see this so often. I mean, the internet is full of all kinds of websites that claim that they are selling substances that are chemical free. Well, the only thing that is chemical free is a vacuum. And, you don't want to be paying for that.
Yeah, definitely. I having worked in ag for so many years, or somewhere I've just like what this is one that's very specific, of course, the non-GMO ones. When you see the non-GMO on like a wheat product, and as someone that works in ag, I know there is no commercialized GMO wheats available for us to eat in the world. So it's always like, are these just being used to drum up support or what? So my next question is, I think this really plays into what we were just talking about. What effect does using these all-encompassing terms have on the ag and seed worlds when it comes to how we grow and develop food? Kent, why don't you take it first?
Kind of building on why I left the last one is, often creates this negative perception of foods that are made more traditionally produced. In our regulatory systems, be it in the US or Canada, we have safeguards that anything that is not safe doesn't make it to the market. But somehow these labels are often placed, or the buzzwords kind of create the sense that if it doesn't have this label, then it's not safe. And I think that reflects negatively on a lot of the science, the technology that it takes to make sure that what we do produce, what we do send on to consumers is safe, and that there is scientific evidence. And often these buzzwords are devoid of that scientific understanding, scientific consensus. I think the other issue is that often these buzzwords become so mainstream that they often challenge what I would label as maybe our social license to use advanced science, advanced technology. And whether it's genetic modification, whether it's the use of crop protection, the use of things, technologies like that, there's often to that if they must be bad, so we must figure out ways to limit or ban their use, and that's can be very devastating, I think, to people that are trying to produce food and do it in a safe and sustainable way.
Yeah, definitely. Joe, do you have anything to add on that? And I think we're suffering from some technical difficulties there. So how about we move on to, Joe's back.
As we were saying before, I mean, marketers use these kind of terms to.
Okay, I think we will have to move on to the next question there, sadly. I think Joe's having a bit of technical difficulties. So we actually have a question from the audience coming from Facebook with Alex Martin, and she is asking, when it comes to buzzwords and new buzzwords that pop up, how do you work on a definition?
Some of them evolve over time, and I relate to even a term like sustainability. Even within the agricultural community, I think it took kind of a while for the agricultural community to understand what was this term sustainability. Was it good? Was it bad? And I think it's only been of recent that we've started to kind of embrace that. I think there's another term out there now that is a little bit of the same way, and it's called regenerative agriculture. And I think, as it's been portrayed, it causes, I think, some people to be a little bit concerned about what does that mean and how is that being applied. I think if we look at the basic definition of regenerative, it means that you tend to leave something in a better position than what you found it. And I think when I think about it from an agriculture standpoint, we should be embracing terms like that, because that's kind of the basic, I think, ethos of what makes agriculture and farming what it is that every farmer I've ever met, ever interacted with, shared that ethos, that their goal in producing food and agriculture was to leave the resources, the farm, whatever it was that they're working on, in better shape than I find it. So I think there's sometimes this tendency to fear those, but understand what those mean, and then really try to relate the things that we do or would like to do in agriculture in terms of a lot of those. And I think it's helping bridge that gap. A lot of this is the fact that we have this distance between consumers and what they know and understand about food and agriculture. Sometimes in food and agriculture, we take for granted and maybe assume that they know that, and they don't. They're looking for information. These buzzwords, these labels, are often ways for them to latch on to something that helps them bridge that gap. But often it's not always, it's often misinformation.
That's really interesting. I like how you kind of mentioned how it's about the bridging the gap and trying to find those words that make sense of things that may be completely like outer space to them. Because of course we work in the agriculture industries, and it's definitely, we have sometimes our own language that we speak. So it makes sense that when we're seeing a lot of these terms like regenerative ag, it's really just trying to encompass words that we use and speak all the time. And I see we have Kent back. Thank you so much. So I guess I mean we have Joe back. Anyway, Joe, I know before you were going off on a pretty good answer there. Do you want to continue on with what you're talking about when we're seeing how buzzwords affect what we're able to do in agriculture for processes and using different science?
Yeah, I think one of the problems with all of these buzzwords out there is that it gives the impression to the public that our food supply is somehow questionable and not safe, except for the ones that have these, no saturated fat, no added sugar, these kind of claims. And that's troublesome. I mean, to me, one of the most troublesome ones is the term natural. And we know that this sells. You see it in all kinds of products. And that is totally misleading, because it gives people the impression that somehow anything that comes from nature is benign and should be sought out. And if you just have the term synthetic associated with a chemical, then that has been brewed up by the devil in a lab somewhere. The fact is, of course, that the only way to know if any substance is safe or not is by knowing what it is, by knowing its molecular structure, knowing how it's been tested, not whether it was made by a chemist in a lab or by Mother Nature in a bush. That has absolutely no meaning. The properties of substance are determined by what it is, its molecular structure, not by its ancestry. And by putting this label natural on all kinds of products out there, I think it is totally misleading. Getting people to believe that if something is derived from nature, it is better than if it is produced by some sort of industrial process. The most toxic substances in the world are natural. The botulin toxin, of course, is natural. Ricin, found in castor beans, is devastatingly toxic. And obviously viruses, bacteria are all natural. So we spend our life trying to overcome the ravages of nature. by applying proper science and by applying proper technology.
That's really interesting. Talking about like the idea of natural products and stuff, and it really got me thinking. Even myself, when I'm shopping sometimes, and I'm not buying specific like food or like makeup and stuff, is one that I find where I'm always really looking closely, and it's interesting to think that way. But I think that really plays into our next question, which is, what are your guys' buzzwords, pet peeves?
Mine is actually the term factory farm. I think it's a term that kind of gets thrown out there. I think it's meant to be disparaging, and I think when I think of the opposite, I think of modern farming as something that kind of has evolved over time. That we've applied science, technology. Farmers have become more productive. The result of that is, we're producing more food with less farms. We're probably doing it in a way that has less of an environmental footprint or impact. And we're doing it in a way that provides adequate supplies of food that are accessible and affordable by large populations, not only in North America, but around the world. I think that creates this perception that there is this nefarious scheme by corporate America to control our food supply, and that everything is automated. And they drive down the road, they see big farms, they think, oh, that must be a factory farm. What they're really seeing is probably a family-owned farm that over time has grown and is now operating on a much larger scale than what it was several generations ago. But when you put the word factory and farm together, you immediately create, I think, a negative perception. And we need to address that by kind of pointing out the data that shows that the vast percentage of all farms are still family-owned, family-operated farms.
Yeah, definitely.
I have a number of buzzwords that annoy me. For example, terms that are put on products which actually are correct but misleading and meaningless. For example, putting no cholesterol on a bottle of olive oil or corn oil is actually correct, but it suggests that that oil has no cholesterol, whereas others in the same category would have cholesterol. No vegetable product contains cholesterol. Similarly with the GMOs, you see bottles of water saying no GMOs. And of course, it implies that there might be other bottles that are where the water is somehow genetically modified, which of course is total nonsense. And people are totally misled about just what genetic modification is and what products contain GMOs. They don't understand that it is very few products. It's corn, soy, canola, and sugar beets in North America, which are genetic modified. And I can tell you that I go sometimes into a supermarket and someone will come up to me, recognizing me, with this huge strawberry in their hand and complain to me as if somehow I were responsible that this is flavorless because it is genetic modified. Well, of course, there are no recombinant DNA modified strawberries on the market. All strawberries have been genetically modified over the years through regular crossbreeding. But the fact that they have this giant strawberry, which they claim is tasteless, which is probably true because it's mostly water, and saying that it is because it's genetically modified. Where does this come from? It comes from seeing so many products that have non-GMO on it, which never were in any way associated with GMOs.
Yeah, I would agree. I like Joe's point, and that's again another buzzword of the use of GMO. And again, it's done in a very much a negative way, and it's often directed to things that there isn't even a equivalent product that would be genetically modified in. So.
Like I said before, with a GMO wheat, we can't even eat that. There is one in the world, but it's not allowed to be grown by any farmer anywhere. And so I think that kind of goes into our next question, which is, how can companies use these words and be transparent with farmers about them? Because I've talked with a lot of farmers, and they're looking at companies like General Mills with glyphosate-free oats, or McKean Foods with their regenerative ag promise. And they're like, yeah, we're fine with following these, but we need to know what we need to do because these are all encompassing terms. So maybe, Kent, do you want to start off?
Well, I think part of it is kind of learning how to communicate with them, and I think a lot of times over the years, the agriculture industry has been guilty of communicating the benefits of this technology in terms of agronomic terms. If we talk about it, in terms of increasing yield or decreasing pesticide damage, things like that. I think we need to do a better job of talking about the benefits of the technology that we use from a societal or consumer benefit standpoint. And that's looking at these things differently. I think if you look back to the last 30 years of the kind of the trial and error around communicating the technology of genetic modification, kind of see that front and center. And I think we've got maybe an opportunity now with some of the new emerging technology, whether it be gene editing or some of the other new products being developed, to really focus more on what are the benefits that technology provides for society in general and consumers specifically, and start talking about them that way. And I think it takes a little bit of different communications and maybe the ways thinking about who we're talking to and how we're explaining the benefits of the use of this science, of this technology.
Well, communicating science to the general public, which is what I do, is very challenging because there's so much scientific illiteracy out there, especially when it comes to genetic modification. To them, it's just an evil word without really understanding what it means. And one of the problems here is that there's no genetically modified product that the average consumer can identify with. We know that farmers benefit from growing GM canola. They get better yield, higher profits, etc. But the average consumer doesn't care about that. The average consumer doesn't know what canola is. They don't know if you hunt it, fish it, or grow it. And therefore, it is very easy to oppose anything that is genetic modified when it's not a product that you see any benefit from. I've said many times before in the past that if that first genetic modified product, the tomato that came out in the 1990s, the Flavor Saver tomato, if that had been successful, if it really would have tasted the way they promoted it, as if a tomato picked off the vine in August, if that would have been true, I don't think we would be seeing all the problems that we see now with genetic modification. We need something that the public can identify with, that they see the benefits of. I mean, the Arctic apple, for example, is one such possibility, because children don't like to eat apples that have become brown in their lunch boxes, and the Arctic apple doesn't do that. That's a positive thing that the consumer can see. And we need more things like that, because in my experience has been that the consumer really doesn't care about how the farmer uses this technology for better profits or higher yield. What they care about is what they can get out of it. And unless they see something that benefits them in their everyday life, it's very easy to oppose the technology.
I would agree with Joe's answer, and I think an example of that is we think about people who suffer from severe food allergies. If we had a way through technology, through breeding, through genetic editing to kind of nullify some of the allergens in food, that would be huge, because I think people could see those kind of benefits. And I think there are there are technologies, whether it's some of these. Whether it be a way to address citrus greening in terms of the supply of fruit and the challenges that it has, or even things going on in some of the other edible crops where we need some of these advanced technologies and probably ways that we can maybe point to more direct consumer benefit. But I agree with Joe. Back to his original discussion about consumer facing products. We haven't seen as many of those, or we haven't hardly seen any of those at all. And when consumers can see that, I think they will have a little bit more direct connection and also faith in the technology.
Well, this is where gene editing, I think, holds a huge potential. First of all, because gene editing is unlikely to be regulated the same way as genetic modification. So there's not going to be, I think, the clamor to put gene edited on a label. And because the editing process is so specific, I think no question, it will be possible to produce gluten-free products by just editing out the gene that codes for the production of gliadin and gluten. And these are certainly possible. It's possible to edit out the gene that codes for saturated fats in a seed. That already is being done. So I think in the foreseeable future, consumers are going to see decided advantages in these technologies, and I think the opposition then will be subdued when they see the real life benefits.
Interesting. Yeah, a lot of the stuff that you guys were mentioning is stuff that I know myself and the other editors I work with at Seed World Group, we discussed. And even one topics that we're discussing in other episodes on this season of the Seed Speaks, where we're talking about science under fire. So it really all ties together. And it's interesting to see when you think of how many people now suffer from allergies and stuff and how much they can be helped by the technology that we know scientists around the world are working on in their labs right now. So, unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. So, thank you to Kent and Joe for being here. I really enjoyed talking with you and hearing your insights on this important issue. And for those watching, thank you for tuning in. And if you missed part of today's live stream, don't worry, we'll have it available on demand on Facebook and YouTube right after. And if you have any questions about the subject or ideas for future topics we should tackle, please send a message to Seed World's Facebook page or feel free to shoot me an email. And next week, host Mark Zinkwitz will ask an important question. Are COVID vaccines a shot in the arm to the biotech sphere? He'll be talking to 3 experts on how publicity around the vaccine is helping bolster public's acceptance of biotechnology. We hope you'll join us. Thanks, and see you next week.